Good evening. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. You're watching Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt, or you're listening to us on the radio or anywhere on the planet on the internet. We are talking national politics today. I don't even know that Trump will come up tonight, other than I just mentioned that name, because it does look like politics may be moving on for the moment, but it's because we've got a number of crises that are happening right now, and we will see how the new leadership of the federal government responds to them. Of course, the biggest news is we've actually had more than 2 mass shootings in the past couple of weeks. On my way here, I was listening to a story on NPR that said we've actually had the higher number of mass shootings since the pandemic started than before. 2020 was up from 2019 by about, I don't know, something like 19% or something like that. But they tend to happen in poorer communities, mostly of color, and they don't get the attention that the last couple have gotten. And of course, we discussed one last week, and they're still debating whether or not it was induced by hatred for Asians. Would like to talk a little bit about how Asians are mobilizing a little bit later. I'll fit it in to the topic. But now we just had another crazy situation in Colorado. Days after Colorado's Supreme Court overturned their attempt at gun control. I don't know the details of that. I think it was background checks, and a judge overturned that. I'm not sure if it was the Colorado Supreme Court either. It might have been federal court. But at any rate, so guns are back on the agenda in Washington, D.C. We're debating it today in the Senate. There are people who are writing, this is the time that there may be real change. I've heard that before, but they're saying this is the moment. We'll see. But they're discussing again. Do we really can we pass legislation that will be upheld by the Supreme Court that bans assault weapons? Chuck?
Well, I think our history suggests that there'll be a lot of talk about it and not much will happen. I mean, that's been our pattern, right, over a long, long period of time. And yet here we are once again. It is true that the Democrats in the House recently passed 2 very modest bills, as I recall. You may have to help me on this, but I believe it was just an expansion of background checks. It was kind of a modest move. Both of those are available for the Senate to take up. The question is whether they will. I think the bet in Washington is that they may take it up, but it may not pass. Neither one of them, because there are some Democrats in red states that may not want to take a vote on that. We'll see how that goes. So the chance of passing, not good. Interestingly, though, I'm reminded that in the state of Colorado, after the Aurora shooting, which was the theater, the movie theater shooting, John Hickenlooper, then the governor, who had not been much of a gun control advocate, did favor the passage of some background checks and limiting the size of magazines, which all passed, and he was still reelected. So there is some precedent for a Democrat in at least a purple state, Colorado, taking a stand on this and not paying much of a political price for it. So, but I don't know if people in Washington will see that as something that gives them a little bit of courage. What I worry about, though, Eric, is that the Sandy Hook shooting, which happened in Newtown, Connecticut, which was when first graders were massacred, among others, including older kids and faculty and administrative staff. What I worry about is that after Sandy Hook, maybe the discussion and the debate kind of ended. If this society thinks it's okay for children to be cut down by guns at school, I'm not sure that we can go very much further than that. There may be some other lines that we need to follow on this. I just don't know. I'm not the one who has the answer for this epidemic of gun violence.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky because we have this thing called the Second Amendment. I've been reading up on it lately on how it came to be and how it came to be written in its current, iteration. And the interesting thing about it, and a lot of people need to understand this, is the British Bill of Rights originally, which came out about, I forget, 100 years or so before our Bill of Rights, did actually protect gun rights for Protestants. But it did conceive of the idea. But in the Second Amendment was actually constructed around the idea of a national militia, but they didn't want it to be compulsory. So the initial draft by Madison says, and I'll get to why this is important, but the initial draft by Madison basically said that this is in order to put together a militia, but by the way, somebody who religiously, and that word was actually in it, owns guns shall not be compelled to be in a militia. Well, the problem with that was Southern states didn't want that guarantee of non-compulsion in there because their slave patrols were essentially militias, and they drafted working class people to be in those things, and naturally, in order to maintain slavery, you need to have a police state. You need to have, militias wandering around back then with guns, and you needed them to have it. So they actually lobbied and Patrick Henry, of all people, he was supposedly anti-slavery, but also not for abolishing slavery. George Mason were pushing for Madison to eliminate the clause that said that being in a militia would not be compulsory in order for them to maintain that. So it's rooted in a history of racism. I mean, it is, this concept that, it's free, it's our most important, some people consider it be our most important right because it's what makes the government afraid to establish tyranny. It doesn't, by the way. First of all, if there's going to be a revolution will get the guns it needs to fight tyranny. What tyranny is afraid of is organized, mobilized people. They're not afraid of the guns because these guns, even if we're allowed to own AK-47s and M16s, the military is still going to have the population outgunned, if that's going to be the basis of the training. If anything, it would be a guerrilla war, and you'd want a small arm that you can hide, walk up to a soldier, shoot him, like, per the French resistance type thing. And anyway, I'm getting into this because we have this idea that, or at least a notion in this country that it's our freedom has to be guaranteed by these guns. It's not. It doesn't even make us safer. We could have people breaking into our house wanting to kill us or whatever, but we take a much greater chance every time we drive our car out of our driveway. So we don't have and we don't really have a perspective on what makes us safe and what makes us feel safe. Anyway, I say all this because this is the rhetoric that gets trumped up every time this discussion comes up. Every time a particular gun is used, there's a rush of people to go buy that gun in the state, which to me is just perverse. I mean, but again, this is part of the culture war. I don't own guns. I never will own a gun. I don't hold anything against people who do. It's just not my thing. And I'm not for complete seizure of all guns. I think that the Second Amendment has to be respected because it's in the Bill of Rights. And if you weaken one amendment to the Bill of Rights, you establish a precedent that you can weaken all of them. But I don't know that it needs to include assault weapons. Which a militia isn't really going to use anyways. You'd be assigned a weapon with a militia these days. So yeah, we've got this debate coming up. It's one which we could dedicate hours of discussion to, but I just wanted to get a little bit of perspective out there because that's what's going to come up. Democrats are going to try to take our freedom All 50 senators, by the way, have received donations from the NRA, some of them very significant. Apparently only one Democrat. Manchin apparently didn't get any, at least according to the website I was on today. I'm forgetting one of the senators from Minnesota is the only Democrat who got significant amount. Mark Kelly got like a $400 check. Joe Biden got like a $400 check. I don't know what that's all about, but it's mostly Republicans who receive donations from the NRA. It's a lobby that, but I think one of the reasons people think there's hope here is that they're weakening. They're in bankruptcy. So
yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
And before we move on, I know we have to go to another topic. Just one thing to add there. You're right about the slave patrols. That has a lot to do with what's in the Second Amendment, and but also as the country was, in the very early days, was seeing that there was going to be some westward expansion. You can also find historians who add to the slave patrols the arming of the people who are moving westward because they may encounter Native Americans in that area, and there was a lot of fear added to the debate because of that as well. So this does go all the way back to the late 1700s and early 1800s. And we're still living with it today.
Yeah, to be fair, people moving west also need to hunt and defend themselves against predators. So, it wasn't all political in that sense. But that's really isn't what we're talking about. I mean, nobody's talking about taking anybody's hunting rifles. I don't know that anybody proposing that, at least on a significant level. I don't even know people talking about taking away handguns, so that used to be a discussion. It's really about these things that can shoot 20, 30 bullets in a second, or a few seconds and take out so many people. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, well, there was an assault weapons ban that sunsetted, but so maybe one of the tacks will be in Congress to try to reinstate that.
Right, but this is again, for it to have any chance, it's got to there has to be reform of the filibuster, and we'll get to that later in the show. All right, we have the border. A lot is happening at the border. We've had people. The increase in people crossing the border has actually been up since last spring, since last April, but it's really become intense as a lot of people anticipating Biden's win headed to the border. Some of them started last fall. Took them that long to get from the Northern Triangle to the border. They're being turned back. Families are being turned back, and so some of those families are turning around and sending their children in just because they feel so hopeless. They want at least their children to have some type of hope of a life, and hopefully with relatives and the rest. When in the meantime, the facilities are being overloaded. We're seeing kids in cages because we don't have anywhere else to put them because there's so it's such a massive problem at the moment. On top of it, the whole immigration system was essentially dismantled under the last administration. So they're frantically trying to put stuff together. And it's a bit of a crisis, and Republicans want to use it.
Yeah, and are you saying that neither political party has a good answer for this issue? This is not new. It's just not new at all. We talked last week about the idea that one way to address this might be to take away the incentive of people leaving those Central American countries, especially the Central American countries, by helping to invest in those countries and maybe helping to fight the corruption that exists among the cartels that run those countries, some officially, some unofficially. So that's one idea. The other thing is we also need to recognize that another reason people are leaving some of those countries and coming in this direction has to do with some of the effects of climate change and the devastation that hurricanes, which are now more frequent and more powerful, are doing to some of those small countries that frankly don't have some of the same building codes that we do. And a hurricane that goes through one of those countries may do a lot more damage than it does here. And so they're left with nothing, and they're hungry, and they have to provide for their families. So, I, for one, understand why they are at the border. There are a lot of reasons why somebody would leave those countries and want to come here.
I'd be here.
And we need to recognize that, don't we?
Yeah, I would be at the border. I can tell you that if I was a resident of those some of those countries, and I'm looking down at my kids, and the only hope is there. And if I'm hearing that the political situation is changing, that we might be more welcome, I would probably head to the border just on that slim chance. As to what I think needs to be done, I mean, I think we need to put money into processing them. We do have a lot of room in this country. We do have there are rural communities with older populations that need younger families and people to move in there to do work that they aren't doing anymore, since so many of our young people head towards the cities. There are a lot of them that would love to live out there. Of course, we've discussed the politics of it in the past. Somebody born here, regardless of the status of their parents, has birthright citizenship. They grew up to vote the wrong way for some people, and that's why there is this adamant opposition. But as to doing the right thing, we need to have money put into making humane facilities for a small temporary place while they can be sponsored by families in there while their asylum applications are pending. And I think we can handle it. I do think you're right. We need to go address the root causes so that people don't feel like they have to leave their homeland, right. And the rest. But that's not going to happen right away. But I do think we need to put money into, an infrastructure where the kids right now can be placed with relatives, and they need to be able to have the structure to be able to find those relatives, to be able to track them down. That takes money, and apparently the Biden administration is doing what they can on it, but they've got to do a lot in a hurry because the Republicans are saying, "Oh, you said it was going to be so much better. You weren't going to have kids in cages, and now look, you've made things worse." In the meantime, Biden has assigned Vice President Harris to head up the effort to address the issue.
Wasn't he assigned that during the Obama administration when he was vice president? Wasn't one of his assignments something about immigration reform? So
that may very well be true. I don't know. Yeah, but it was probably as a liaison to Congress.
Well, and here's the thing. You mentioned that nothing legislatively is going to happen quickly, and I agree with that. But until we get comprehensive immigration reform, this problem is going to be revisited over and over and over. As a lot of issues will, until we do something legislatively, and until our representatives and senators in Congress are able to get anything done, these problems are just going to be coming back over and over and over again. We need a government in Washington that actually functions and works and can address some of these issues. That's why we send the people there. And then they do nothing except obstruct, and that's it. And so until we get serious about immigration reform and we're able to discuss things across party lines and come to some decision as to how to move forward, we're not going to solve this problem.
Well, I do have some thoughts on there. And one of the things that where Biden, I think, is making a mistake here, where his administration is making a mistake, is they're not letting reporters in. And he promised transparency on this. He sees this as a PR crisis as well. Doesn't want to have the same photos taken, kids in cages and all of that. But he needs to let the media in because he needs to tell the story, and he needs to be able to use that to present to Congress that we need money and reform to allow this stuff to happen. I hope he takes it aggressively. And some of the people who've come, including entire families, have been processed, and they're living with families in places like Minnesota and the rest, and they're happy. Shots of their kids playing in the snow. Those are the stories. That's the narrative that he needs to do. He needs to, rather than trying to cover it up, he needs to open it up and say, here's the tragedy that's happening. Here's what we need to make this happen. to
Yeah.
make more of this happen. And that's what he needs to do right now. And he needs to be appeal to the sense of compassion, not to the sense of fear, because the Republicans right now are playing it up as fear. They see this as their wedge issue for next year. A lot of whether it'll be successful is going to have to do with where the economy is.
Well, the way for Biden and any other administration, the way for the Biden-Harris administration to not be worried about the media taking pictures of children in cages is to do something about the problem. What the media is doing is speaking truth to power and then letting the public know exactly what's going on. That's just called putting the truth into the public discussion. So if Biden doesn't like the pictures, he needs to do something about the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that's, you're not, now they are letting some people in, not certain cameras, and there is a legitimate concern about these kids being very vulnerable and maybe not wanting the kids to be all over the media, but they can be told to blur faces out and the rest, and not make it a spectacle. Of the kids. So, anyway, that's, I hope Biden picks that up, or pardon me, Harris, because this is now her project.
Yeah.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, the next topic, Congress. This is the weird thing about politics, national politics in this country is Congress or factions of Congress can take positions which are not popular with the public, and they don't really face consequences for it. For one thing, as we've discussed on this show, a lot of people vote their by culture, by identification. They vote Republican or Democrat because they see that as an expression of who they are. They are not influenced by policies, and even when they disagree with the policies, it's still they're voting for their person, and their basically their group. And so with that in mind, we've got the dreamers, letting them stay in the country and setting up a path to citizenship for them if they want to, job opportunities, the rest. That's like overwhelmingly popular, like something like between 60 and 70% in every poll, and sometimes even higher than that. Mm-hmm. That is, there's no reason for that. Should be a low-hanging fruit, maybe separated from the rest of the immigration reform, because that should have been settled a long time ago. Right now, it hangs on an executive order that Obama passed within the discretion of immigration policy, but it needs to be cemented by congressional action. And, if they're not going to pass that, that's got to be the death of the filibuster as we know it.
Well, I think you're right. And, it seemed not too many years ago that we might have had a solution to the Dreamers and a pathway to citizenship. But, elections have consequences. So over the last, 4 to 5 years, that kind of went by the wayside, unfortunately. So, yeah, of course. And I liked your idea from earlier that in pointing out that there's a lot of room in this country. And there are a lot of rural areas that are not doing well and don't have much of a future. So, it kind of shoots down the argument that, we don't have any more room in this country. We can't handle all these people. That's just ridiculous. I don't have an answer to it. I wish that we could see some of these issues as being symptoms of a broken political system, because as you point out correctly and importantly, there is mass agreement on a lot of these issues into the 70s, 80s, and 90%. And when you get those kinds of numbers in a society this large, you should listen to it. Yet our political class doesn't, because as you again point out, they're not always about issues. They're about power and maintaining power and doing the work of their funders.
Well, another one is the public option for health care. That is supported by, in a poll I read today, 62% of the people, which includes a lot of Trump people. I think the Democrats ought to push that through as a standalone, not necessarily make it. Everything doesn't have to be part of some bigger package as a standalone. The assault weapons ban is also popular. Even a lot of NRA supporters support at least some kind. They'll get into discussions about, well, what exactly is an assault weapon? You don't have a good definition of it, and they try to get all technical about it. It's like, no, we can come up with one. Anything that shoots, however many bullets a second, you can set that up. Or maybe we just don't allow the weapon to be sold, but we don't allow the ammunition to be sold. You want to hang it on your wall, whatever. So, I mean, it's... and all of Congress appears to be going against public opinion with regard to restoring earmarks. Now, I don't necessarily oppose earmarks. I oppose it when it becomes such a system that it gives every incumbent what they want to be able to buy votes in their district. But having money set aside for specific projects for geographic benefit, I don't necessarily oppose it, but most people do, and they don't want to see a return to that. And it looks like it's going to be bipartisan. That's going to be something that they're going to pass to allow. And it just, when it comes to incumbency, sometimes it's a party of its own that manifests itself.
Well, that's right, and that also induces bargaining too. One senator or representative will say, "Hey, I'll vote for this earmark if you vote for this earmark," and then pretty soon you end up with millions and potentially billions of dollars added to some bill that had nothing to do with any of that to start with. So, and that's where the concern about pork barrel spending comes from. And, we've been through that, tried to get rid of it, and now here it is again. You're right, though. There are some good things about earmarks. There's also some trepidation on the part of a lot of people who look at spending and how easy it is, in the political process to get more and more and more put into a bill until, at a certain point, it just becomes overloaded with money and spending.
Yeah, I'm for local projects as long as it's part of some comprehensive policy and not just something thrown in so that, to create more jobs in a particular district. And maybe we need to discuss the criteria, because sometimes it's blurry as to between what's earmarked and what's just basically part of a policy that might have a particular purpose in a certain geographic location that it doesn't elsewhere. But that's anyway. I mean that's a discussion. But the point is they seem to be moving forward without concern about the majority, because when it comes down to it, people will say, I don't support earmarks, but hey, if my guy can bring some of it back here. Do I really object to it? I'm not going to hold it against them. So
yeah, and the problem then is you end up with a bridge to nowhere, because it benefits one person who's up for re-election, and it's a lot of money, and there you go. You're back into the debate about earmarks. Yeah.
We actually have a bridge to nowhere in Humboldt County. I don't know if you've ever noticed when you're driving south or north on 101, in between Myers Flat and Wyatt, there's this overpass that crosses. And one day I asked, where does that go? It goes to a single house on the east side of the highway. It was built in the 60s as part, some sort of influence. I think somebody intended to do some type of subdivision back there. But basically that expensive thing services one home on that side. It's kind of an interesting thing. But anyway, you notice it next time, about halfway between Myers Flat and Wyatt.
Okay.
That's a good example of somebody with some influence getting what they want.
Somebody they wanted. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Voting rights. Again, we've got a sort of competing federal trend, proposals of the federal government running against what's happening in the states, Republicans across the country, where they've got majorities in legislatures, are introducing bills. We've discussed this to basically suppress the vote. Everything from limiting mail-in voting to making it a crime to bring pizza and water to people waiting in line to vote. Anything that would make it easier for people to vote. Literally, you've got one party that wants more people voting and the other party wanting fewer people voting. S1 is in Congress. I believe it's already passed the House. Maybe, I'm not sure. But it's to be debated in the Senate. There's no way it will pass if the filibuster is allowed in its present form. Again, this is one of those things where maybe you allow for a talking filibuster and let them stand up and explain why they don't want people to vote.
Yeah, so much of what we are talking about, especially tonight, the whole linchpin is the filibuster, right? For so many reasons. But as far as voting rights goes, I think we've talked about this over the last couple of the years on this program and on radio programs, Eric, and it comes down to maintaining power and maintaining relevance. I mean, that's where all this is. It's for the GOP in particular. It seems to me that it's a race against time because demographic change is on the way. It's apparent. The statistics bear it out. People on both sides of the aisle in Washington know it, and it's speeding up, and it's going to be difficult for the GOP to maintain any kind of sway in Washington if they don't do something about this very soon. So that's the motivation. Now, mentioning statistics, recently there was a report that was released that indicated that kids who are under 18, but who will be turning voting age fairly soon, within the next few years, among that cohort, among that group, the majority are non-white. Mm-hmm. And but it's especially that way in Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and Florida, where it's an overwhelming majority who are non-white, who will be of voting age very soon. It's a near majority in North and South Carolina. So policy, given those statistics, policy on the GOP side is taking a back seat right now. Mm-hmm. And if you recall, even recently, even in the 2020 election, the Republicans were so concerned about these kinds of things, they didn't even have a platform. There was no public policy that they were running on. They just decided they would support whatever the dear leader was going to support for the 2020 election. So the GOP for now has abandoned public policy and is trying to make sure that fewer people can vote. They see that as their only way forward, instead of allowing their ideas and public policy to evolve as society evolves. They're trying to just suppress the vote.
Yeah, I mean, it's and what we're talking about here is an attempt to revive the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted pretty much by the Supreme Court majority in 2013, where where states that had a history of racism and voter suppression on the basis of race were being scrutinized and having to make reports and explain changes in law and have to account for it if the changes in the law had disparate impacts on the particular groups' ability to vote, particularly African Americans in the South, right? So now what it does is you pretty much have to prove under that ruling that there's specific intent to suppress the black vote. And so what they want to, what part of what S1 will do is it will, first of all, establish neutral commissions for redistricting. That would solve a lot of problems, right? Yeah. If we could do that. Is this a federal overreach of state power? I don't know. I suspect that the Supreme Court will probably find it to be such, but also it wants to override and say, if there is a disparate impact, you need to look for alternative methods of accomplishing whatever goals you're trying to accomplish, if they're legitimate. That is, if there's an alternative that has a similar impact towards that goal, that you will not, you will use the one that creates the least impact a minority group's voting rights. Yeah, pretty. I mean, it's not even that radical stuff, but it doesn't look like it looks like it's going to be a straight party line.
Is S1 similar to HR1? The HR1 has been around for a while now, called the For the People Act, which deals with gerrymandering, as you were talking about, and so on and so forth. I have not read S1, but
S1 is the Senate version of the For the People Act.
Okay, yeah. Is it as comprehensive?
I'm not sure if it's identical to HR1. I think it's a version, but already I think some changes have been made. I know that they're adding things. For instance, there was something about mail-in voting, and they wanted something was changed about that today. So they're still writing it, I think, and discussing it in committee.
The Republican opposition to mail-in voting is one that I don't understand because let's recall the demographics. Republicans depend heavily on voting by people who are 65 years of age and older, who sometimes because of health, sometimes because of transportation, find it difficult to get to a polling place. And so for a long time now, they have relied on voting by mail. And so it seems to me that the Republicans are not calculating this in the right way.
Well, it does a lot of things. It would ban voter ID laws, or at least soften them. And they could sign sworn affidavits instead of showing an ID, for instance. It would hold a minimum of 15 days of early voting. It would take redistricting out of the hands of elected officials. I mean, it does a bunch of things. It is quite comprehensive, and the Republicans are objecting to it on, you've got all these proposals. Oh, it also would mandate, I'm forgetting what it was, something else. I'm going to lose. I'll come back around to it. But but at any rate, the Republicans are saying that it's what is necessary in one state isn't necessary in another state. There's rural versus urban states and the rest. And it's sort of like, okay, then make counter proposals. But it's just basically, again, the party of no.
Yeah, exactly. The party of no, the politics of fear. The benefits of gerrymandering for the Republicans up to this point. No doubt the Democrats have engaged in gerrymandering as well. We need to make that point. But yeah, I think a lot of this, the root is the politics of fear. The Republicans trying to maintain that, you folks are going to lose power soon. We need to get this pushed through Congress. And, they've seen how the politics of fear has worked for them in the past. They're trying to ride that horse again.
Yeah, it also mandates states to enact online, automatic, and same-day voter registration to give voting rights to people who have served their time and are no longer on probation. Even if it was a felony. I quite frankly, I think it makes no sense to deny voting rights to somebody who's been a criminal because you want them to participate. It's just anyway. There's a lot in it. I agree with everything I've read in it so far, but I'm not the majority, so we'll see if this gets through. But so far, Republicans aren't even really offering anything alternative. They say one size fits all. Well, then tell us what you want in it and what you don't want in it, and apparently that's not really happening.
Where does this go? What's if you can look down the road a little bit, where is the debate headed in Washington as S1 and HR1 try to make their way through? What happens? Does this once again come back to the filibuster?
It does. It comes back to the filibuster, and it is one of the things that there's the biggest push on, saying you cannot let the filibuster kill this. This is, absolutely the filibuster. They say is rooted in racist history. A little bit of truth to that, not entirely true, but there is some truth to that. And you're going to let it, maintain racist policies in voting that seek to suppress the black vote, the elderly vote, the young vote, and to make it again harder to vote. Now, it'll come down to states' rights too. There's going to be a question as to how much of this will survive, especially the existing Supreme Court. But it's got a lot in it that probably will survive. There is some federal primacy in court that allows you to at least dictate how a president is chosen, even if it doesn't affect other things. And so it's tricky as to what is protected, is barred by the 10th Amendment or not. Probably provisions of that will be overturned if it passes, but they definitely cannot pass it without shutting down the filibuster or forcing Republicans to get on television and argue why they are against people voting.
Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy.
We are going to raise issues that, historically have not been raised.
What about the nuclear option, doing away with the filibuster? I can tell you that would be the end of the Senate as it was originally devised.
All of this is possible for America. Who was standing in the way? Mitch McConnell.
Where an insurrection that sought to overturn an election, when that failed, the action moved into state capitals.
Marty Walsh, I think this is a kind of a special one. Marty Walsh, I'm trying to do the research. I'm hoping somebody out there can tell me, but I was told to me, and I haven't been able to verify it, that Marty Walsh, who used to be a union official, is actually the first person to hold the job, Secretary of Labor job, who was a union official. If that's true, I find that astounding. I'd like somebody to tell me if that's in fact true. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But he is very popular with, not everybody in the union movement is happy with him, but that's because within the union movement, you've always got these rival, factional politics that just get weird. But he was the mayor of Boston. He's been now replaced by the first African-American woman, actually first woman and first African-American to be the mayor of Boston. They're dealing with quite a crisis there, and apparently she's rolled up her sleeves and dug right into dealing with the pandemic crisis there. But Marty Walsh is progressive, working class origins, and probably about as good a choice as can be made after my disappointment that Bernie Sanders isn't going to hold that position, and Bernie Sanders has never been in the union. So it does, I think, represent possibly a change up in politics. But if that's the case, and you can email us at redwoodwonk@gmail.com. If anybody has any information as to whether it's true that he is the first person to have been a union official who is Secretary of Labor, again, I would find that astounding.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was one of those folks who was hoping Bernie would get that job, but there are a lot of political reasons why Biden did not appoint Bernie or did not nominate Bernie for Secretary of Labor. We can get into that at some point, but
to maintain the majority of the Senate.
Exactly. When you're looking at 50-50, be careful who you appoint, because that may tilt the majority there. So basically that was it. As far as the mayor of Boston goes, Marty Walsh, let's recall that the city of Boston does have quite a history with labor politics, going all the way back, over 100 years or so. So I'm not surprised that a mayor of Boston would be somebody who would have some credentials along these lines. I'm not as familiar with Marty Walsh as I should be, but I'm not overly surprised by this, and we'll see what happens.
We have one last topic before we get to our predictions. One is that Becerra, of course, has been just barely by the skin. He had one Republican vote, so they didn't need to bring in Kamala for the tiebreak. And Becerra is now in the position. He is now no longer Attorney General for the California. So there are a number of people on the short list, but my understanding is even though there was push from Pelosi and Adam Schiff himself, Adam Schiff is not on the short list. I don't know if this is the product of Newsom facing a recall and just not wanting to do something that could be deemed controversial. But he is off the short list, which is kind of a shame if that's the reason, because I think Schiff would make a great attorney general and probably that would be a springboard to the Senate eventually.
Yeah, I think Adam Schiff is one of the brightest legal minds in the public sphere right now. I think there's little debate about that. I mean, if you just listen to some of his oration during the impeachment hearings, I mean, the guy is overqualified, if you want to put it that way. I think that you're right. I think that my sense tells me that a governor who is facing criticism for his handling of a pandemic and some of the mistakes he made during the pandemic and has a recall, at least in the discussion, is making decisions based on politics alone right now. So, I think that's definitely the explanation.
All right, quickly jumping back, apparently William Wilson was appointed by President Woodrow Wilson, as Secretary of Labor, and was indeed a labor leader. So apparently, Marty Walsh is at best second, and I'm starting to think that maybe there's been a few others as well. I will do that research and get back next week. And with regard to Newsom, he is facing a recall. And so he's probably going to be kind of careful about his politics. But now there's a lot of pressure on him around AB 1400, which is California's Medicare for All kind of version. It's our kind of a single payer initiative, which has a lot of support. And there's a lot of pressure on him from the California Nurses Association to push for that. Will he take a chance and push for that? It's, again, one of those things that's popular. California might be the kind of state that can handle something like that. Vermont was unable to, but there's economies of scale. And if it happens in California, it could happen in the rest of the country. But at any rate, that is, we'll be discussing as we get closer to what it appears to be an inevitable recall election. We'll be discussing all of those politics and how he'll respond.
Yeah. Well, I think that, universal health care is something that benefits people of all political backgrounds, right? So if I were him, I would go bold on that and see how it goes. Over and over and over, polling shows that things like that are overwhelmingly supported by people of all political stripes. So why not?
Absolutely. And again, we'll get into it. I really think that unless Newsom really messes up between now and then, that the recall will fail.
Yeah, I agree.
It's, but again, it has implications for the Senate if Feinstein doesn't make it. A lot to discuss there. But interesting that he's pulling back. Now, maybe he's got other reasons for not appointing Adam Schiff either. But
I don't know. I think the recall is also going to be interesting in looking at the future too, and how it impacts Gavin Newsom's plan for his political future. I mean, this is a guy who has had his step-by-step political plan in place for a long, long time now, and this is a bump in the road. So we'll see how it impacts his future decision making.
Yeah, and again, it looks like the economy is going to be improving. And the more the economy improves and the more we pull out of the pandemic, the less likely anybody's going to want to fix what ain't broke, so to speak. Yes, that was a really stupid thing and hypocritical of him to go to that restaurant in Napa Valley. Yes, he was a little bit slow to getting the vaccine out. Seems to have made up for it now. Apparently, California is pretty high. I read today in the North Coast Journal that over 40,000 Humboldt County people have received their shots. That's like just under a third of us. So that's if other counties are doing just as well, then it's going to look pretty good for them, and it's going and the recall effort is going to look petty. And this is not the California of 2001 when Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to come in of that caliber. But
just one quick follow-up on that. You're absolutely right. A good economy tends to shove a lot of criticism to the wayside. So as the economy recovers over the summer and the fall, we'll see how that goes.
Okay, that brings us to our predictions. I'll go first this time.
Okay.
For one thing, I want to renew my prediction. Now that Adam Schiff is off the table, I'm going back to my Huffington. Pardon me, not Huffington. What is our congressman's name? Why did I say Huffington?
Oh, Jared Huffman?
Jared Huffman, thank you. It's just my brain going. Jared Huffman, I'm predicting he will be the pick. He's still on the short list.
Really?
And now I know he's kind of under pressure to pick somebody of color, but I'm not sure he needs to do that for this position and this time around. It would be a non-controversial pick. He is, as we know, Huffman is a strong progressive, not just a suit, as some of us thought when he was initially being elected. Smart guy, and would do well in that position. I'm sticking by that one, and I'm also going to predict that once again the gun initiative, control initiative, will peter out because nobody wants to take on the NRA, and there are even a few Democrats who are afraid to do that. I just don't. I think it's going to take a major change in the sea of consciousness on the issue for it to happen. I think we will have more. It'll come up again, and I just don't think that's going to be resolved anytime soon.
Well, that was going to be my prediction.
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this will be a repeat of former discussions about gun control and gun legislation. I think there will be a lot of talk about it, and in the end, nothing will happen, and we'll move on yet again. But to follow up on your prediction about Jared Huffman, you're absolutely right. When he was first a candidate for Congress, I think, I include myself in this, a lot of people were a little skeptical about whether he was going to be progressive and whether Humboldt County politics would be something that he would be good about. And I think he surprised a lot of people. I've interviewed him countless times, and you're absolutely right. I find him to be as progressive as anybody I know. And he's solidly progressive across the spectrum of political issues. So I hadn't thought about that as Attorney General, but if you say he's still on the short list, yeah, I could support that.
All right, and real quickly, I hope I'm wrong. I hope we're wrong about the gun thing. Yeah. Maybe we will be wrong. Maybe there's a change in politics that it's somehow different than it is. But I always see articles about how this is the one, right? Sandy Hook, this is the one that's going to lead to change. I hope I'm wrong. I will enjoy eating crow if that's the case.
Absolutely. I agree.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. And we will be back on next week. Thank you, Matt. And you've been watching Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. Until next week, keep thinking, keep learning, keep reading.